Well, hello. I am Kathy Aubert, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this live webinar or to the recording, Creating Inclusive Organizations, Part 1. I am Kathy, and I use she, her pronouns, and I just want to breathe and acknowledge the original custodians of the land where I'm in Denver, the Arapaho. This Part 1 is really looking at how do you focus on the readiness of your organization, the readiness of leaders, and mostly how to get people ready to want to look at the current state, see our climate, our culture, who's it serving, who's it's not by group identity, and then get more energy and commitment and awareness to want to create change, to be much more inclusive, socially just. When I was working in higher ed, now this was 30, 35 years ago, I was doing diversity work. And if you can't see me too well in the little corner that I'm in, I think I was doing air quotes. I was so focused on the individual level, making sure I didn't say anything wrong, fall into a pothole or a trap. I was so focused on making sure that my biases weren't showing and I was showing up as a good one, whatever that was. And then over the years, I realized, or people really nudged me, there's more to it. I need to get to the group level and understand common dynamics. And that's what we did last month in microaggressions. Common microaggressions, the climate and cultural interpersonal dynamics that happen that people in marginalized identities are left feeling dismissed, unheard, invisible, and just really negative differential treatment. And so I was doing that work in the world, but it was really not till I started working with Elsie Cross and Associates back in the early 90s, did my doctorate with some folks we'll talk about today, Bailey Jackson, Rita Hardiman at University of Massachusetts Amherst. That's when I really got challenged to go to the systems, the organizational level, and that's what we're going to do here. I was slow to be able to move into looking at culture and climate and thought I was doing enough. And so I wanted to do this two-part webinar series as well as the virtual institutes. Give you a chance to begin to ground in what are the three phases of organizational change, and particularly in this session, the 6-stage model, this is jargon, multicultural organizational development, MCOD. And you get a chance to learn that in deeper ways, as well as see ways and strategies to teach to your entire organization, because that will mobilize leaders, will get employees ready, similar terms and concepts, maybe some more bravery and authenticity to have dialogue about where are we, where do we want to be, and then as we get into part 2, some strategies and tools to move organizations along and develop the infrastructure to sustain it for the long haul. I mean, if you're like me on Facebook, the news, just talking to people across the nation, there is just an ongoing and renewed, even this last month, it feels, energy, commitment, if not urgency, to live up to the promises that we say we're about, whether that's as a nation, as an organizations that you're in. People are marching, protesting, really walking out, all these youth walking out of junior highs, elementary schools, high schools, marching for our lives, demanding that we live up to our vision of creating an equitable, socially just organization, community, nation, world where people truly are valued to the dignity, get their needs met. I noticed I just went to the world, I felt despair because these days I feel powerless. So that might be why I work at the organizational level. But people are raising issues and demanding meaningful change. And this energy and the movements that's happening in our communities and nationally, internationally. I just saw yesterday, I think it was folks in South America, I think it was Brazil or Argentina, were organizing for change. And then they did all this Facebook and to support the teachers in Oklahoma as well as West Virginia, who were also raising issues about equity inclusion in their organization. And I was so impacted and touched. I'm not sure many people in our country look outside our quote borders. Many are seeing the gap between where we want to be and where we are and saying this is painful and it just violates our core values. And our day-to-day lived experience is undermining our organizational goals. And so the employees that we're here to support and serve, the people we're here serving or supposed to be serving, are raising questions about our policies, our programs, our services, the climate, the culture, and are asking for structural changes because they're noticing the changes in the demographics of who we're serving, who we're attracting to our organizations. They're noticing the lack of competence of leaders and employees to truly create inclusion. And people are beginning, as I said, to question how we do business, whether you're a nonprofit, K-12, higher ed, for-profit, is not matching where our goals say we're supposed to be. And so while we're recognizing where we don't want to be, where we shouldn't be, these issues are not new. People have been raising them forever. And I was just in a couple organizations that said, you know, we've been doing so many surveys, we're tired of filling them out because people aren't creating change. And if you look back 5, 10, 20 years, those same surveys probably are raising the same issues. But what might be different now is more people are asking the organization to change, or maybe you've gotten some leaders that have a vision and are helping to mobilize. People in the past have been courageous. It's actually probably been dangerous for them to raise issues, whether it's surveys or focus groups or trying to talk to leaders. And so build on the momentum of the past and the current momentum. Now, whether it's a critical incident, that's what usually happens. Something happens in the community or in the organization. Oh, we need to change. But the effort to change only lasts so long as people are protesting, marching, or having open forums, unless the leaders make a deep commitment. And so there's a knee-jerk reaction and then energy fades. So what I'm offering today and in part 2 next month are some tools and strategies to help people get in it and stay in it for the long haul. Organizational change, I'm told, 7, 10, 12 years to truly change and get infused into everything, a commitment and just organizations that meet the needs of our increasingly diverse clients, customers we serve. And just because change efforts stalled in the past, you can shift that. These tools and strategies, I've worked with enough organizations, heard of enough, that when they implement more organizational change and they're bringing in leaders and change agents and hiring people with these capacities already, you can get some momentum and keep moving, but it is a long-term culture change. So in this webinar, I want you to get more capacity to engage in authentic dialogue. Get your entire organization to be looking at the climate and the culture through an inclusion, social justice lens. Now, I use those terms interchangeably. I know some people don't. Organizations I'm usually invited to do consulting and training with might not be ready for the term social justice. I don't care what we call it, just that we're talking about power, privilege, and marginalization and shifting that and creating equity and inclusion. And we'll talk a bit more about that. I want you to get out of this the capacity to lead, empower others, mobilize others so they can implement meaningful, sustainable, systemic organizational change. And that's going to mean increasing their capacity, which we'll talk more about in part 2, and increasing the readiness and the willingness. It's going to take a lot of dialogue and conversation. This is not a one-shot deal, and it's not a quick fix. People are going to be in different readiness stages and willingness stages. And so meeting people where they are and having the conversations with these tools will help mobilize energy, mobilize commitment, see where we want to go. Because the end goal is the capacity for everybody. And this is part of the model I'll share, but I've also learned this many other ways. Everyone has the capacity to infuse equity inclusion into everything they do, every interaction, every policy, every decision, every moment they're meeting with someone or envisioning a website or how they're going to put together marketing. They're envisioning full breadth of differences, intersectionality. They're thinking about power, privilege, and marginalization. They know how to revise the current practices and policies, and when they're creating them, they take everything into account and all the possibilities of folks. And they don't get themselves stuck thinking, I'll never create a policy or a program that meets everyone's needs. They keep continuous improvement, lessons learned, and then we keep going. That's what an inclusive organization can be. And then you create the infrastructure that if key leaders leave or key change agents leave, we're hiring, attracting, promoting, developing all these competencies and people that can continue the process we're making sustainable. So this webinar is about how to prepare the soil, to prepare people to be actively engaged in analyzing and better positioned to create meaningful change as they work together. Now, as you see, this webinar, I'll be sharing information and tools. You have the handout. I'll do a more in-depth Q&A. I'm hoping we'll do some Q&A at the end of this, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And so you can always use a chat room now or Q&A now. Probably the Q&A to pop in your questions at the end. Catherine will just look through and share some with me. Next Thursday, same time, but a new Zoom link. I'll do an hour of Q&A. Whoever shows up, we'll all be able to see each other if you want, or you can type them in and I'll answer questions. And the same topic. Again, I do a virtual institute every month, a 3-hour, and that'll be in this month, April 26th. And that's where you can pull people together. I'll lead a live workshop, but you don't have to be leading the activities. You just have to have someone in the room can help move people in and out of activities and let me do the heavy lifting. And people are finding they like to come to the Virtual Institute if they want to be a trainer and a facilitator using these tools. Bring people together, have me do it, but also be watching how I do it. When we're trying to test readiness or help people get more ready, I'm going to share with you 3 quick activities. One is have people reflect and then share what's the source of their passion and commitment for creating inclusive organizations that accelerates the persistence, the success, full breadth of our employees, all the different identities, intersections. And what's your passion to create policies, practices, programs, and services that meet the needs of the full breadth of those you serve or are supposed to serve or want to serve. And you can slow this down to have people talk in pairs. They can reflect first, they can draw a picture, but then talk about it, and then talk about it as a leadership team, maybe with your change agents there, and then notice the impact of hearing everyone's passion. We have to have connection to our passion and be able to talk about that to keep the energy moving. And if people are at different readiness stages or capacity to understand these issues, to hear people's passion might show them what's possible. Now, another activity you can do is to have people talk about what they see occurring or not in the organization, region, nationally, internationally, that makes the conversation about creating an inclusive organization critical and important. And while you're doing that, not only do you want people to focus on how far we've come, but also how far we go. And similarly, reflection time, partner, then large group, or if you have 100 people in the room, small groups, and then large group. But this is a change management strategy to really have people share not only passion, but what they're seeing and start to speak truth to power. Now, you can test the readiness if you have some top leaders that enter with and only stay at how far we've come and do it with a defensive energy or perspective, then that'll tell you something about how you then need to engage them. If you have leaders that say, you know, I've been here 5, 10, 20 years, we've come a long way, we've built a lot of infrastructure, but we have a long way to go, here's what I'm seeing, that's a clue that they might be ready for the work that I'm offering today. It's not that leaders that are defensive can't be involved in this, but you want to make sure, I believe, you have enough people in the room that can also say how far we need to go and have a passion about creating equity and inclusion. Not blame, shame, judgment, but passion about there's another, I see a vision and where we could be. You always want to anticipate resistance, and that's why I ask people to engage how far we've come. And if I'm in a workshop, I'll start with that. And I'll want people, I might even have that the first conversation. I want to lift that up and have it be okay. We can talk about that. But I also want to make sure people deepen the capacity to do both, how far we've come, how far we need to go. Having a conversation, you can find out readiness as you ask to, especially your mid and senior leaders, how do you feel knowing that others are looking to you to lead meaningful, sustainable organizational change, create equity, inclusion for people we serve as well as inside? Many organizations are far better, I'm not saying great, but they're better at serving an increasingly diverse clientele with an equity, power, privilege, marginalization lens. And most every organization I get invited into, they're like, we do this for people we serve, but we're not doing it for ourselves. So make sure that we're asking both those, who we serve and who we are. So asking people how they feel, and they might feel scared, unprepared, but if they start to say, I don't know enough, then they're ready for the work we're going to do today. What people are doing in organizations, in my opinion, is necessary but not sufficient for long-term culture change. We're doing quick hits, one-term diversity trainings, hiring one person to do hiring for us with an equity lens. We have to get it infused in everything we do. And if you've been on my webinars before, you know I talk about a couple metaphors that we have to be doing trifocals. And if you're like me, when I started out, I just was at the individual level. I'm a good person and I treat people fairly, and I thought that was enough. I had to understand that people get privileged and are treated in marginalized groups, and there's discrimination and oppression. I had to understand the common microaggressions, and so we have to get that and understand the pervasiveness of that. But what I'm talking about in this webinar is at the organizational level. What I find is not many people think strategically and organizationally, and so I do believe these tools over time, these activities can help people build that muscle. I sure didn't have it, and I find a lot of people don't. So this metaphor could work. Your organization might like this metaphor better to help people see that if they're at the individual level and just trying to be a good person and look at themselves, that's important, but necessary, not sufficient. You have to have the group level, but you notice you can't see all the cubes. They might be good at race or good at class, but they may not be very good about disability issues. They may not understand immigration status or people that are assumed to be undocumented or religious oppression, people that are Muslim or Jewish. They just may not have all the different cubes and pieces. So that's part of professional development. As we get to the organizational level, that's where you might be able to see the mission statement. Your website might have people of color and people that present female and male, and maybe if someone's sitting in a wheelchair and you feel really good, like, look how diverse we are. And maybe your marketing sounds good and your job descriptions say, we want to hire diverse candidates. By the way, when we get into the model, that's kind of a stage 2, maybe stage 3. An inclusive organization, in my opinion, would have position announcements saying something like, now I'm extroverting, so give me a little grace here. We're an organization committed to creating inclusion and equity and social justice for the people we serve as well as internally. We encourage candidates to apply that have a demonstrated capacity to work effectively on increasingly diverse teams, to develop policies, programs, and services that meet the needs of the increasingly diverse clients we serve with all their intersecting ideas, right? Kind of passion to help our organization live up to its commitment and its vision and values. And here's what our vision and values are. Could you imagine? You have that in every position announcement, you have that on every website, and then you're living it every day. But most organizations have things on their website that mask what's really going on inside and present a very distorted view of what's really occurring in their programs and services, their culture and the climate. And so really inviting people gently into this work, which I think, while this is confrontive work, I think I'm inviting people in gently and let the material be the confrontation. That with time, people can understand organizational level and commit to being a part of that. LCY Cross, EYCA, was a significant part of my development, and I've adapted their, but not much, this is mostly their work, diversity, culture, change process. They're no longer existing as an organization, but I deeply value the people that I met and all that I learned there. And so helping people understand that there are phases to this. Now, there might be 5 or 6. You can come up with them, but theirs was 3, and I like to use that. I've organized these webinars in that. We'll be mostly doing phase 1 in part 1, and in part 2 next month, we'll be doing phase 2 and 3. So it's critical. We increase the awareness and the commitment of leaders to invest the energy, time, and resources and mobilize everyone to create greater inclusion, greater social justice. And it's critical you do that. But most organizations and the people are not ready to do it. So once you get the commitment, you need to then build internal capacity. So that's a lot of training as well as some infrastructure so that you're not just doing one-on-one training all the time. You get people who are doing facilitation, people that are inclusion practitioners, change teams. And we'll talk about that in part 2 a good bit. And it's all till you get in phase 3 where people are skilled up. We're hiring people that already have these capacities. We're doing performance management to keep professional development going, holding people accountable. Everybody's infusing. And so that's where we're headed. So as we look at phase 1, how do you increase the commitment and the awareness, particularly of leaders and managers? And you want to be partnering with your current change agents, those really brave folks that have been raising issues and maybe been labeled as too militant and too sensitive. How do you nurture them and have them involved in the process so that collectively we're learning about this model, these strategies? And so one way to start, again, I don't think there's the right way, but one way to start is to come together and say, well, what is our vision? What do we think equity, inclusion, social justice mean? And literally talk about it. And not in a right, wrong way, but, well, this is what I believe and this is what I mean. And some organizations can have this kind of conceptual understanding. I'm more of a hands-on person, so as you can probably tell. And so telling stories about when you were equal and what was equitable, and this is a wonderful metaphor I first learned. Vernon Wall was the first person to share this with me, that equal is when everybody gets shoes. And I was like, that makes sense. But equitable is when people get shoes that fit. And I've added maybe inclusion would be, you get shoes that fit, that meet your needs and style. Because if you put me in a size 8.5 high heel, that would not work for me. Now it would fit my foot, kind of, but it doesn't match my style, my needs, and it clearly, especially if you had pink shoes, that would really not work for me. And so having people, and then to be honest, one pair of shoes is not enough. Now I know many people may not even have shoes in our world, and yet shoes for working out, shoes for work. I'm not saying 50 pairs of shoes, but social justice might be people have enough resources to get their needs met. So I ad-libbed a little bit. You can see if that metaphor works. In phase one, as we're trying to do the vision, it might be retreats, it might be trainings, people coming together for ongoing conversations. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways to help people get at vision, because people have different learning styles. It could be conceptually, people can say, given your role, what's your vision of an equitable, inclusive, socially just organization? And people might be able to reflect, partner, and then small or large group. I find it helpful to look at what other people do. And if you've worked with me, you've seen these before. This is Adams Bell Griffin out of Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. But I'd collect up organizations that are your peers, your competitors, the ones you aspire to be, find out where your leaders went to college, or where else they worked, and research those mission statements, their vision statements, their values. And if you like them and they really are more than what you have, bring those in. Those are just change management strategies. And then have people read them, dialogue, what words stood out to you, and engage. Again, it's not a one and done and it's like move fast. No, it's the conversation, the dialogue that'll help people get closer on the same page, build relationships so that when there's a bump or there's a disagreement, you have a relationship within which to have that conflict, this disagreement. This is not a conceptual. This is about a community development process. Ask people what words are missing, what else they would like, what they'd want to shift. And that may be a process. Now, I'm a racehorse at the gate. And so this process does not usually work for me. I like the envisioning, but to actually then write it. So there might be a nice cross-section of the organization, some leaders and change agents, different identities and marginalized identities that may come together and take some of the information they're hearing and the notes they're taking and come back. You have people that are good wordsmithing. I'm not. I like to get the energy moving. And so a couple of activities could be asking people how they already intentionally create equity inclusion, what they're doing. This would be people that are more kinesthetic like me, and give me an example. Now, talk about change management. If you have people tell what they're already doing, the folks that are not are going to be like, ooh, we're behind, and that might help them get more ready. And it's not, again, blame, judgment, or measuring, but they're just telling stories. Oh, this is how we changed our hiring. This is how we're doing training differently. I'm doing staff meetings like this, and people are like, wow, those are great ideas. We're advertising differently. And so they're beginning to see what's possible, but then ask the question, what is your intention behind that activity? What was your goal? And that's the way you can tease out some vision and values and just collect it all up. And any and all of this can go in and get kind of smushed and schmurgled down to a statement that then can go out the entire organization to give input in. Again, change management, you want to get out to your consumers, your clients, your partners in the community to give you feedback, because especially they may want you farther along than you are. And so A, it's marketing and it's reputation building, but B, you're letting people know you're in the journey, but you're getting their ideas, and that may help you then form your vision. Another strategy to help people talk about vision is some people are left-brained, but some people are right-brained. And so you get people in small groups, a chart pad, give them stuff to write and draw with, and then everybody does an individual picture or symbol, and then they can talk about it. You can then move people around to the different groups and see what people see, and that might help people get grounded in and then talk about it. I find most people can't, off the top of their head, they need something to reflect on. And so these strategies might be useful. Another angle might be just ask, why is it important for our leaders and employees to create inclusive, equitable, socially just organizations, services, programs in everything we do? And people that have a compelling reason, they may talk about it and they may tell stories about some clients or their own experience. And by the way, storytelling can be one of the greatest ways to help people get more ready because it opens their heart. And people may talk about, it's our vision, it's our purpose, and we're not living up to it. They may say it's the right thing to do, but that's going to be just 1% of your folk. Some folks may find the compelling reasons is changing demographics. If we want to stay financially viable, if we want to be a competitor, we need to find ways to attract and retain an incredibly diverse group of folk that have the talent, and we have to help develop everybody's capacity. And it's our reputation. We've had 2 or 3 people leave the organization lately from different marginalized identities, and it's impacting who's applying. And so we're at some pain points. So having people, whatever it is, and to be honest, as a change strategy and a readiness strategy, find out and build a relationship with your leaders. What are their concerns? And then help find a compelling reason for change that meets their needs. So these are all key aspects of phase 1 in change management. Getting leader buy-in, increasing their awareness, get a greater commitment to the long-term change. Now, I'm saying long-term a lot. That might scare too many leaders. So you may just say, we need to do some changing around here. But some of the leaders do need to know that it's a long-term consistent so they don't undermine you. Now, take a deep breath. While this is happening, you may want to also do some more tactical strategies that help people see what could be different. And one way on page 3 of the handout are learning guidelines that I just use. And I'm asking people lately, before we talk about in a workshop how we're going to engage in these ways, I ask them, okay, think about your unit, your division. When did you last explicitly discuss, negotiate, and agree to work within these types? And it's the top of page 3. And most folks look at me with a blank stare, but some, as I say, who's done it recently, give me a clap or raise your hand, and about 5 or 20%, depending on the organization. And again, this shows what's possible. And then again, leaders can say, what if we all go back in the next month, have this conversation? How do we want to engage each other so we really create greater inclusion? What working agreements do we already work out of, but which ones will help us be more effective? And then this new question is number 3, having the leaders and change agents reflect what could be different in an organization if our entire organization engaged in these types of working agreements. Now, I'm not saying these are the only ones or the right ones, but this can start the conversation of who are we, who do we want to be, and how do we want to engage each other. Now, these aren't rules that get people comfortable, and so we're not engaging in difficult conflict. So for instance, if you look at, I think, number 12, it's actually we are naming when we feel a hot button or a trigger, and we're sharing it. Now, that's not creating an environment where people are just robots and just do what they're told. Even number 11, we're describing and noticing the dynamics around us, especially with an inclusion lens and noticing dynamics, panning, pay attention now. So in some ways, I believe these learning outcomes are a further along stage in an inclusive organization. So if you can start having the people chew on them and start to say, well, right, we do interrupt each other and only a few people talk. How do we share airtime? It's just getting some energy moving how we want to be. And you can also ask this question, if you feel triggered in our team meetings or in a workshop and today in this webinar, if you feel a hot button, how can you take care of yourself and negotiate that? So for today, you may want to take a drink of water, maybe write down what's going on for you. If you're watching the recording, you could pause it and just kind of reflect or talk to somebody about what's going on. You can pop something in the chat or put a question in about it and just go inside and see what is it about what I just said that has you have that unexpected wave of emotion. What we're focusing on now is at the organizational level, what are some strategies and tools, in addition to the ones I've talked about, that can give you, as the change agents, an idea of how ready is the organization, the leaders, and how do I help get them ready? Oh, I skipped too fast, just like many organizations do. This is my favorite question these days, because if you don't have the model that I'm going to share in a moment, yesterday, I had an hour and a half with groups, which is not my preferred, but we move fast. And I just asked them this question. 0, not at all, 10 completely. How equitable, inclusive, socially just would you say your current culture and climate is for all members of the organization, full breadth of differences? as well as all those we serve. And then I had them get in a horseshoe, 0 all the way to 10. Now that's a medium to high risk activity. So you may want to have people kind of write it down, turn to somebody, talk in small groups, and then talk about it. I usually like to ramp it up a bit because I'm not there in an organization more than a day or two, and we got so much to do. But you can make your own decisions. But this conversations will get people realizing where people are. And then you could ask, what do you notice by group membership? Who's saying that we're the lower numbers and who's saying we're higher numbers? Because mostly senior leaders often are higher numbers than folks that are farther down the organization. Folks that have been there longer and have one or more marginal identity often say, we're not as far as we need to be. And so this conversation over time with everybody could actually be an incredible change tool. And a follow-up to it is, do all of our members feel valued, respected, included? And how would we know? And that's where you can start introducing your data from surveys, focus groups, some other qualitative, anecdotal data. Again, no names, but just, I've talked to 5 people who've come to me in the last month in different marginalized identities. Here's what they told me, and I just don't know what to do. But engaging leaders into talking about what they know. And often leaders are isolated and insulated, and people tell leaders what they think they want to know, especially if they're trying to work their way up a ladder. And so data is critical to get leaders to see the current state and what's really going on. And so getting their buy-in is really about helping them see current state and where we need to go. And to be able to do this across the full breadth of difference. Now on page 5, I believe, is a list I use in diversity training of categories of difference, the privileged, marginalized identities. If you look down the middle, having leaders and your change agents and your managers begin to think by group membership, who feels included, who doesn't. And this is not an exhaustive list. And in fact, I think pages 20 to 24, group identity cards, I'll talk quickly about towards the end. That's a tool we'll talk about more in part 2, how to use those to analyze policies and practices. Right now, there are 29 different identities. I'm sure there'll be more in a month as people write me and say, you forgot these. In your organization, you want to keep expanding the list of any identity of a marginalized group. Folks that feel I don't belong, I'm not seen as useful, I'm dismissed, seen as defective, we're not in the conversation, our policies and practices do not meet our needs. Just keep expanding and getting people to expand, because some folks will be saying, you forgot about us, but they also have some privileged identities, most likely, which they're forgetting. And that's the work you'll do in some of the diversity training. By the way, my June and July webinars and virtual institutes, where I'll be sharing some of my favorite ways to, especially in phase 1 and 2, to increase the internal capacity of folks. Now, at this point, most folks will feel this way. Leaders are like, I'm committed, but I feel stuck and I don't know what to do. And to be honest, even change agents, some are like, I know enough to try to get leaders to pay attention, but how do you create systemic organizational change that's sustainable? And people are feeling, going, now what? What do I do? How do I fix it? I'm unsure, puzzled, confused. And if they have a lot of marginalized identities or like me, we want a quick fix. And this is not a quick fix. This is culture change you're talking about. And so what I have found is the MCOD model, which I'm going to offer now, gives me a compass and a roadmap. It's almost like a GPS of where we are and where we need to be. And then some of the materials I put on top of it are the tools to get there. And I just want to really acknowledge the work of Drs. Hardiman, Rita Hardiman, Evangelina Holvino, Bailey Jackson, and their work out of UMass Amherst 35 years ago, taking all the work in organizational development, which some great work, but as they looked at the material, as many other people were noticing, there was an assumption that these are white organizations run mostly by men, able-bodied, upper middle class, we could keep going, Christian, and people had not taken a look at the power and privilege dynamic. They may have done it with hierarchy, but hadn't broadened to other areas. And so these folks said, we want to create a model, and they did, multicultural organizational development, that is committed to eliminating exclusion and inequity. And this is on page 7 in your packet. And they're about recognizing and valuing, maximizing everybody that's here and all their different identities. and bringing in more folks. We really reflect the clients we are currently serving and need to be serving to stay successful and viable. And we want to create and revise all of our policies, programs, services. So this is what they mean by the goals. So they really support the success, increasingly diverse populations. Now, you might have heard me say this now 10 times in this webinar, but repetition helps. It's so in me, it just comes out. But I've taken years to get here. Now, I've added, and I believe this is a part of theirs, we're preparing members to be effective 21st century leaders at all levels of the organization and those you serve, particularly if you're serving youth in any way and community members. How do we help them be effective 21st century global leaders as well as within this country with an equity inclusion lens? And so these are the goals. And then their definition gets even more, and that's at the bottom of page 7. And you'll notice on the left, I've put in a place where you can use a scale 0 to 10, because as I just mentioned these, I want you to reflect on your current organization, and that can be a department or division or your whole organization. How many of these, how close are you to 10? 10 being completely, so number 1, clear commitment to create an inclusive organization. Yep, our organization, clear commitment. You see it everywhere. The leaders talk about it everywhere. You might be, we're kind of a 3. I think it's on our website, but I haven't heard anybody talk about it for a year. Maybe a 2. So where are you around that one? Seeks, develops, values. I don't want it to go quickly. So you're recruiting, you're developing the folks you have, and you're valuing them through professional development, promotion, and retention, the contributions, the talents of all employees. And that means you know about their talents and all their different group identities. So you can give yourself a score 0 to 10. And this much, the people you bring together will actually do these activities. Does your organization include all members, active participants that shape the organization? That doesn't mean everybody has final decision, but it does mean you are gathering input, you're considering it, and people have many parts, many points of the decision-making process where they can influence it. And even in a lessons learned, you're like, that decision didn't quite turn out. You bring people together. And you're making sure you're bringing people together that reflect the great diversity in the organization and your community and your partners. 0 to 10, does your organization reflect the incredible diversity, social, cultural groups throughout the organization, top to bottom? And all these folks demonstrate the cultural competencies, multicultural capacities to serve increasingly diverse clients. Those are 2 different questions in there. And you might have several different answers, because you could answer that from around people that are low income compared to people who are middle to upper income. People who have physical disabilities, people that have emotional, mental, neuro disabilities. Can we serve folks that have different religious, spiritual ways of being? And that leads to number 5. Some of it's our employees reflect, can we serve to the capacity, but then do we act and eliminate? We act on our commitment and get rid of all forms of discrimination, oppression, exclusion. This is just a short list of racism, sexism, gender oppression, ableism, classism, religious oppression, keep going. It's one thing to say, y'all can be here. It's another to say, we want an inclusive environment where we are eliminating oppression. You're getting a flavor for what the advanced stages are. And this organization, it's inclusive. They follow through in their communities, local, regional, national, international, helping to share their tools or strategies, helping other people move along. Environmental, meaning culture and climate, as well as planet environmental. And so as you've gone through this, where do you think you are? Because this then can go into a whole model here. Now, what we just described would be the multicultural, the far right end of this model, Jackson-Hardiman model. They talk about 6 stages, and these are developmental, and you can be at one stage as an overall organization, or you could be also, each unit could be at a different stage, and within a unit, you might be stage 3 compliance around sexism and supporting of cisgender women, but you might be at a 3, that is a 3, you might be at a 2 around race, you might be at a 1 around gender identity, and you might be at a 1 or a 0 around folks who are assumed to be undocumented and around immigration status. And so it's a complex, even though I think it's very understandable pretty quickly, once you start working it, it's very complex and you can use it many different ways. So the key to organizational change is get everybody to know this model and be able to talk about it and use it. And this just mobilizing people to want to move from where we are and where we need to be. So as I highlight the 3 categories and then the 6 stages, I'm going to go this quickly. I believe it's on pages 8 and 9. I want you to go deeper now. Where is your organization? Because in the Virtual Institute, I will actually get people to move where we think we are and form a horseshoe, and then have some conversation about this. This is all tilling the soil. Where do you think you are? But as you're listening to me, where do you think your leaders would say, the managers, individual contributors, where would your customers say? So the first 2 stages, exclusionary and club, stages 1 and 2, there's blatant exclusion and tokenism of people. It eases up a bit in club, but not much. And what I love about Pamela Graglia does all my graphics, and you can barely see club and exclusion because it's so a part of the air we breathe, and it's just, this is the way we do things, and people are not empowered to question. Anyone that even raises an eyebrow is probably let go pretty quickly. Homogeneous, there's one right way, and it's our way. Some organizations move and become non-discriminatory organizations, and they might even start there. They're like, we are against all discrimination, but the compliance is only about just enough to get through accreditation for our reputation to be enough to be successful, have the shareholders and board happy, make sure we're not sued. We'll do basic training, move on to affirming. Stage 4, we're hiring a bit more of folks who have not been reflected in our organization, but you still have to fit in. Most organizations think they're much farther along than they are. And it's still rare for me to find a stage 4 affirming in the work that I do. Multicultural, by the way, don't get hung up on the language. You can call it inclusion or socially just. I talked to Bailey a few years ago. He said, we came up with that term 35 years ago, and multicultural was revolutionary. So those organizations, everybody is creating culture and climate, making systemic, significant change to make inclusion. And actually stage 6 is aspirational. So we'll just be talking about stage 5. And so now this matches my humor, but I was working with Vernon Wall and Jamie Washington one day sharing this, and Vernon's like, we got to come up with one-liners. So we sat down. So stage 1 exclusion, no way. It's the top leaders' way and all their privileged identities, and nothing else works. The club, our way or the highway, it's not all that different. They just might look a little more inclusive, but it's like, yeah, no. Compliance, the letter of the law, accreditation, just what we had to do to get by. Affirming organization, we welcome diverse candidates. Come on in. Again, when I have more time, I hate that term, diverse candidates. And then stage 5, inclusion is central to everything we do, and everyone is living our values and practices every moment. I kind of put 5 and 6 together, since 6 is just aspirational. The authors say they've never seen one. And so what I'm going to do now is just walk through each stage quickly, give you some more indicators. As you see on pages 8 and 9, these are the author's descriptions of these stages. Be thinking about, where are we overall? And are there pockets? Because most organizations I get to work with, there are pockets of exclusion. And this might be what the top leaders look like. They literally all look alike, have to dress a certain way. I'm exaggerating a bit. All the ideas are the same. And the irony of this graphic is they have all these ideas, but they don't meet the needs, because the center is what we have to, the problems, but the ideas we have don't meet the needs, but they're able to sustain this homogeneous culture. And so the indicators, just they openly, blatantly are like, this is who we are, and we restrict membership. So if you think about historically and currently, many golf clubs or fraternities, sororities, fraternal organizations, and communities, just really hostile and toxic to folks that are different from the privileged groups that set it up. They're intentionally designed to maintain the dominance. And particularly in exclusion or stage 1 organization, there is overt discrimination, exclusion, harassment that goes unaddressed. The faculty member or the senior leader that brings in a $5 million grant but is sexually harassing women, overlooked, and just maybe just pay off the women, right? I could go on, but I have only a few minutes left. So that's stage 1. Stage 2, you might notice it's the same graphic, because literally I believe it looks the same. Well, let me tell you a quick story about stage 1. I'm watching Queen Sugar, and one of the key characters African-American woman, biracial, very wealthy, is a part of the sugar mill owner. She owns a mill, and they're meeting to decide who's going to be the sugar mill queen. I don't have the language right, but this was just the other night. All white folk, just a handful, and her. By the way, they made the decision almost before she got there. They didn't even tell her what time the meeting change was, but that's even more about exclusion. So the white woman is just kind of handing out and saying, oh, I really like this person, this person. They all are white, cisgender, traditionally beautiful white women. And so the African-American woman pulls out the one person who applied, the African-American. She goes, what about Kiki? And the white woman says, oh, she's not sugar mill queen material. That's a typical stage one exclusionary, maybe early club. It's like, nope, they don't belong. Now, at the club, you're still maintaining the privilege of those that have started and held power. Very monocultural policies. There's a right way, business as usual. There's a way to dress, a way to look. This is how we do things, but it might be coded by calling it professional. All the ways that the dominant culture believes you should be doing things are institutionalized into hiring, performance management, all that. Now, there will be a few, and again in quotes, token is a painful word, but that's what's going on. Folks that are brought in as tokens so we look better, but you have to have the right credentials. And in fact, you have to have maybe much better credentials than the folks that are in power. And yeah, we may say diversity, but we're just talking about it in the way that the leaders can handle it, very much in their comfort zone, very much diversity light. Now, stage 3, so to keep breathing, compliance organization. These folks are committed to removing some of the discrimination. And if you notice by the graphic, there's a few more ideas, but still a lot of those ideas may not solve the problems we're trying to solve. Because we're only committed to removing discrimination, we may not yet be doing it. Some access to more people, but very low levels of the organization. And there's no change to the culture. And don't make waves. Yes, you can be here, but be lucky you be here and say and appreciate that we let you in. Token placements, and they're often in roles that are to try to get more diversity in. You got to assimilate, don't rock the boat, and goodness, don't talk about oppression. So this organization might be doing Title IX training, sexual harassment training, 1 hour, 2 hour, diversity-like trainings, food, fun, festival, holidays. Very common that I'm called into organizations right about here. Stage 4, we welcome you. Come join us. But if even in this metaphor of the image of the puzzle, into our organization. And so folks may think they're doing more diversity, but in fact, they really aren't changing the culture or the climate. They are committed to eliminating discriminatory practices and culture and policies a little bit, and they're doing it. Actively recruiting in different places, providing support and career development for those that have been historically marginalized. But it's from this energy of let's help you so you can be successful here. It's a deficit model as opposed to this organization is not set up to be successful and inclusive of everyone. That's stage 5. At stage 4, we're still being non-oppressive. Let's not be discriminatory as opposed to inclusive and socially just. And again, you have to assimilate. So stage 5 looks very different demographically, and the competence of folks are very different. It's in transition. It's a redefining organization, but they're actively working beyond non-discriminatory, actively working to create the environment and changing it and getting everybody trained and full, empowered to create inclusion in everything they do. And to that, people are required and accountable to question limitations. Now, there's early 5 and late 5. Early 5, you're training people to do it. Late 5, you're only hiring people that have demonstrated capacity to revise practices and policies and create inclusive organizations. You're not hiring anybody that can't do that. And you're engaging all people in decision-making, sharing the power. Again, there still might be a decision-making line of authority, but it's very inclusive in how you're doing it. Now, this model is deceptive because, at least to me, it looks like, oh, we just can easily walk from one stage to another, but this is really what it looks like. Oh, sorry. Stage 5, I usually teach it differently because most people don't know what stage 5 looks like, and I don't either. So what I want you to do is, here's a couple ways that I teach the model. Instead of just lecturing to people, which is not my learning or my capacity, you can get people into groups each at a chart and give them each a stage, maybe 5, but at least 1, 2, 3, 4. Give them 5 to 7 minutes to look at the indicators in pages 8 and 9, chart out what would it look like, other organizations or ours, and then move them to the next stage and just keep circling them around until they go through all the different stages. And then they'll create and then sit down and talk about it. You could also ask them, what would the demographics be, the culture, what would the patterns of behavior, how do we make decisions, what does recruitment look like? So you can get them to think more systemically, but not everybody can think this way. But if you can have those up or a list as they're going around, what would a stage look like? Because it'd be very different. I put people usually into groups of 3, and one does 2, one does 3, one does 4. They've 5 minutes to think about their stage, and then they teach each other and then discuss how that works. Because stage 5, since I've never seen one, I asked the author, Bailey Jackson, he's never really seen one, so or not many. So I have people teach each other so that they get the first couple stages, 2, 3, and 4. I like to do exclusionary together. And then I say, so let me talk about stage 5. As I mentioned a moment ago, it looks like it's an easy move, but this is actually what it looks like. It's a huge chasm between particularly any stage, but particularly from affirming 4 to 5, inclusive redefining. And so I was asked once to help an organization imagine what we were doing at 5, and they're like, we have no examples. I'm like, I don't either. So I just wrote down what I thought it would look like. And so in your pack on pages 11 to 16, what I have people do now is think about, and have them all do leadership. What would leaders be doing? And that's A. How would we be planning differently? And that's B. And then I have a whole bunch of other daily organizational activities that I just brainstormed. And this is probably 8, 10 years old, so I probably need to revise it because I bet I have different ideas. But it still seems useful to folks to get, oh, I thought we were stage 5, and then you're telling me this is what I would be doing as a leader? Oh. So it's a way to get 5 into people differently than just conceptually, and then just be able to look at it. Great leaders don't tell you what they do, they show you how it's done. And so as you're working with leaders, working with organizations, some questions they can ask at stage 5 when I'm doing workshops, and again in the Institute we'll do this, I'll have people print out the group identity cards and cut them up so they literally have the cards, and then I'll say, so I'm gonna give you a decision, and how might it be useful that that's the decision? But then sort through these cards, and by group membership, whose needs does it meet? But by group membership, who might have extra hurdles, barriers, or who might unintentionally create some negative impact? If you can get leaders, change agents, your diversity council, every manager to be able to think in this way, and that every moment of every day they're thinking with an inclusion lens, that's where we're headed. And this activity, which we'll do in the Institute, can help them do it. Full breadth of differences. So here's the policy, just real quick with reflect. Bereavement. This actually worked for me when I worked inside an organization at a university. The policy allowed me to take time away, paid time, for the funeral when my dad died, immediate family member. And so just reflect by group membership, who might have a different family structure that most early organizations in stages 1, 2, and 3 would not call immediate family members. Now, a stage 5 would recognize families of choice, extended family. That might mean your best friend's daughter who you helped raise, right? So by group membership, and whether that's by race, marginal identity, folks are marginalized by sexuality or gender identity, and we could keep going. But to be able to have the conversations and literally talk about 10 to 15 policies, practices, and services so people can sort through the cards and think everything we do with an inclusion lens. Now, some people aren't ready to use the cards. They don't quite think that way. So you can just have, what's a time in your life there was a policy or practice that was not helpful to you? I remember being 14 going to 9th grade. My folks, because of their racism, I believe, sent me to an all-white private school that had a rule that girls, and I presented female, identified female, had to wear skirts. Now, when it was August and September in Maryland, I was okay with that. When October started coming, I was like, oh no, I'm 14 years old. I don't remember if I did a petition or what I did, but I know the policy was changed. And I know I was a part of that. So to get people to tell stories, policy, practice, program, or service that was not helpful to you, did not support your needs as a group level, created barriers, or negatively impacted people in your group. they don't have to have changed it, but they just talk about it. And that can just help create more readiness and ability to talk about. Now, I wonder if some of those exist in our organization, but they're going back 5, 10, 20 years. You can also ask leaders to think about a recent decision and who is at the table. Literally at the table, whose voices weren't represented. What input did you use and from what group identities? What additional input could have helped? And how did you develop the buy-in of those that had to implement and were impacted by it? And how could you have done it? All of these questions, for leaders that are earlier in their awareness, these last couple activities might get them ready for the MCOD model and to then move. But you're helping people at phase 1 of organizational change to think with a strategic inclusion lens by policies, practices, services, whose needs do we meet and whose don't, full breadth of differences. That's what we're trying to get people to. You meet them where they are, do some of these activities to help them get ready to think about how do we do business, how do we need to be doing business intentionally, helping people's needs get met. Now, once people learn the model, I mentioned I have people move. And you can either put up on the wall the numbers or just point and have people move and then have them track or pan, pay attention now. Those are skills I talked about in my microaggression workshop last month. And talk honestly. And it's not quick. You then have them move maybe into small groups and have a conversation, brave enough to start a conversation that matters. And so they move to where they think the organization is and they talk about it. You then could have them on that continuum. What was your lens? Were you thinking kind of hierarchy? Or were you thinking race or sexuality, gender/sex? Oh, wait. If people have low positional power, where do we think our organization supports them compared to high positional power? If people are, quote, traditionally beautiful compared to those that aren't. So you can ask them to move depending on different. If somebody has a criminal background, I could keep going. That one's more for K-12 and higher ed. Then you send them down small groups and let them talk. What do you see? What do you experience that has that your current state and why? And share that. And that'll build energy. It'll build confidence and it'll build capacity. And like, I hadn't thought of that. And then the whole group talks about it. And that really helps people seize perspectives. There's not a right perspective. There's not a wrong perspective. In fact, you have to hold the environment so you hear them all. Because as people are hearing all the different issues, they're going to start feeling like this sign, which is all these different directions. You have to hold the container to hear it all and say there's many tools and activities, and that would be the next step, and that's what we're doing in part 2. The strategic actions to start where you are and to move. It's important, though, to know where you are and to have an understanding of that, because without that, it's hard to then move. If you use activities that are building the capacity of people and your leaders are not on board, then you'll do a train the trainer and then no one will think it's important and then the trainings will be hardly attended. So you have to get leader capacity, commitment, engagement first before you build stage 2, phase 2 in the internal capacity building. So we'll do this in the next webinar, part 2, and really in depth. And some of the structures we'll talk about not only trainings you need to do, but develop internal folks so that you can sustain the training over the years. Inclusion practitioners, which is a model that, again, I learned in LCY Cross and have shifted it to other kinds of organizations outside of corporations. Embedded people in every department and unit who get in-depth training to partner with a leader together to get equity inclusion in the line of supervision, the business of the organization, not a one-off in a diversity office. The people of color, it's their job on top of their full paid job. We'll talk about inclusion change teams, how to develop clear expectations and hold people accountable, and then comprehensive professional development programs. So that'll be part 2, and that's phase 2. And then also we'll be talking about phase 3, which is all related to that, but ways to infuse equity inclusion into everything we do. Take a deep breath. If you want something in life in your organization you've never had, you got to do something you've never done. This webinar was giving you a framework of many of the tools, strategies, the way to think about what's possible and what we need to do. We'll do more of the strategic actions and ideas next time. But sometimes your only transportation is a leap of faith. And so having people come to the Virtual Institute to have some dialogue or use these activities on your own to get people in conversation, but it truly is a leap of faith. Now, again, on the front page of my packet are all 3 of the books that I've written recently, with lots of stories, tools, strategies for self-care, difficult situations, as well as organizational change. I do talk about MCOD in the middle book, but I'm not racist, as well as white culture, white supremacist cultural practices, Tema Okun's work. And so most organizations that I get to in the US they privilege white culture. So that book might be an interesting book club and book read for a number of people, just to help ready the ground for the organizational change that needs to happen, and then take those learnings to other forms of privilege and marginalization. Just want to remind you that I'll be doing the Virtual Institute April 26th, and May we'll be doing part 2. Again, please bring anybody you want to these webinars in the institutes. June, again, I'll be doing equity inclusion. So if you have folks that are doing training or want to be doing more training and they want more tools, I'll be doing that. And then in the Q&A, or actually the chat room, we'll get both. What other topics do you want me doing? I know I'll be doing difficult situations and self-care as we move into the fall. Just let me know what you want me to be doing. If you're finding you want to work with me or deepen capacity of people to be change agents, there are a couple quick things, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I've started a masterclass for inclusion practitioners. It's a place for folks can get some of these capacities with me every week in some live Zoom, as well as lots of self-paced learning in a community where we come together and in a structured way learn tools and strategies, as well as some open coaching. What do I do if? Having a blast doing that. It's an ongoing course. You can join anytime, and it's a 12-week course that you get access to everything. I'm also working with a handful of organizations doing comprehensive professional development, where I'm working with executive leaders in consultation and strategizing. 30 people get to do the master class. 1 person gets to do my year of transformation, where 1 person gets to really, how do I help transform our organization, be an internal key change agent and consultant, as well as some other features. And I want to end this webinar before we open up with everybody taking a deep breath. We have to stay grounded in our passion and our vision. And I do that with President Nelson Mandela from South Africa. What counts in life is not the mere fact we have lived, in my opinion. It's what difference we've made in the lives of others and in our organization that will determine the significance of the life we lead. And so the work that you're doing in your organization as a leader, as a change maker, how you're impacting the lives of those you work with and those you serve, I believe that is what is significant in the work that we do. And so with that, take a deep breath, add some comments to the chat room, some questions you want to ask. And while you're doing that, I want to remind you we have a Q&A call next Thursday, same time, different Zoom. So my guess is Catherine's already put this in the chat room. And you'll probably get an email. Whoever has signed up for these, you'll get an email about all my things. But I do want to let you know, my friend and colleague, Dr. Tanya Williams, and I are going to do a special Q&A right after the Virtual Institute on April 26th. When I did the microaggressions last work, several folks of color in the chat room, as well as I think it was in the Q&A call afterwards, so lovely and gently said, so Kathy, these activities, these tools, yeah, they're good. But I'm a person of color in a predominantly white organization, and I need more effective tools and strategies to interrupt and respond, given my place in the organization with white supervisors. And I'm like, yeah. And so I said, let's see what I can do. And so Tanya was available, and we found a time and just worked out. So that'll be bring anybody you want, cross race, but it'll be really focused on folks of color and organizations, tools and strategies. And I will bring on people of color who want to ask questions. So Q&A, why don't we open it up? And Catherine, what do you have?
Yes. All right. We have a couple of great questions here. Now, as far as the Q&A, just a reminder that all that information was on the thank you page. You'll also get a link to that tomorrow when we send out the replay. So I think we're providing that in many, many different areas. But certainly you can always email us if you can't find that somewhere. All right, so we have, I'm gonna start with the earliest questions here. We got some as early as 15 minutes into the presentation, Kathy, so you may have answered some of these while you were talking, but the first one that we got was, how do you handle resistance?
So I mentioned engage it. And so if you remember some activities, I anticipate what's the resistant, and so then I ask a question to bring it up and out early in a way that's not an either or, right, wrong, fight, um, competition, whatever. So, and part of it is seeing resistance as an opportunity for engagement. Now, Dr. Delight Frost, one of my mentors and colleagues at LCY Cross Associates, talked about and has a whole model on resistance as it's an energy. And you see people who are, quote, resistant as the enemy or a source of energy. Enemy, energy. The traditional kind of dominant culture way is resistance is enemy. I have to fight it, as opposed to, they might have some great ideas, or they're in a position that we need to have on board. So let me engage concerns, questions, wonders, build a relationship so that their energy, instead of pushing against it, it's a flow and a dance. And so we may talk more. These are good. In part 2, I'll make sure we come back to some of this more. Some tactical strategies is think who that person listens to, who can influence them. And so if I was in an organization, I'm probably not the person, because I am I'd be seen as more of a radical revolutionary if I was inside an organization. That's why I'm a good consultant, and I probably wouldn't survive inside. But who do they listen to? And who's got a pretty good understanding of these issues that is in their circle? And so how can I work with somebody that works with somebody that can work with their influencer, that can work with their resistor, and ongoing? It also might mean I see them as canary in the birdcage, right? Or in the mine, I guess. That if one person's willing to resist, they're reflecting a larger number of people that just aren't talking to you. So it might need to slow down, do some focus groups. It might mean you need to do some more open forums about why we're doing this. It might be you need to do some more basic foundational training to get people the capacity and share stories and why. So quick answer to, we have to find out what the resistance is about, but those are some quick strategies.
All right, the next one we have here is, what would you say to coworkers of color who state the white people should get their own training? It's not our job to teach them.
Oh, yeah. It's not the job of folks of color or folks in any other marginalized identities to do this work. 2 and 3 jobs most folks of color have in any organization, and 1 paycheck, which often doesn't reflect their capacity and contributions of even the 1 job. So I actually want whites to be doing book clubs. I want whites to do white affinity spaces. I want there to be workshops for whites about our role as change agents, and at the same time investing the same amount of energy, if not more, in the folks of color doing their work. How do we be change agents? Because it's a different strategy when you have marginalized identities, particularly for people of color, given our racialized climate, racist white supremacist climate. Now, if your organization is a club, early compliance, so stage 2 or 3, this is probably what you're going to be hearing. You know, the folks, it's like what whites are thinking is, these people of color we let in, no, they're not going to say it, and they may not even know they're saying it. But these people of color we hired, they're not grateful to be here. They're not doing their job. Oh, yeah, they're doing their job, but nobody's serving the folks of color in the organization or the clients of color. And so folks of color are doing 2 and 3 additional jobs. They're on all the different searches. They're on all the orientation, onboarding groups. They're on all the websites. They're on all these different task forces, because you have to have a diverse group, so you have so few people of color. And then you want them to be teaching whites on top of that. So when we get to part 2, we'll be talking about the infrastructure changes, training, developing trainers and facilitators, inclusion practitioners, having a diversity, equity leader office, but not so that they're doing the work, but they're helping the organization infuse it in everything we do. So that's a comment that would come early in the awareness of an MCOD organization or somebody individually that's not on board yet. What you got?
All right, so the next one has a little bit of a backstory here. I recently transitioned from working with students and student affairs to working with faculty exclusively. For example, equitable hiring processes, strategic diversity planning, etc. Thus far, I find many of the tools I've used with students to encourage self-reflection and envisioning inclusive community do not resonate resonate with faculty, as they tend to see them as frivolous, shallow, lacking in empirical bias, and so forth. Can you comment on how to modify this approach to suit faculty's needs?
With a huge grain of salt, because I come out of student affairs 35 years ago, I might want to think about how do you get your deans and chairs talking about what are the competencies they want faculty to have in addition to their subject matter expertise. Now, I'm using a lot of jargon, but this is what you'll hear with faculty often. So we want a chemist that can really teach chemistry, but then ask the people in administration, because they're getting all of the student conflicts, they're getting all of the grievances, they're getting the racial harassment, the sexual harassment stories, the homophobic harassment, they're hearing from international students that feel dismissed and overlooked, right? So they're hearing, hopefully they're hearing all that. So if you have an ombuds person, maybe HR people that are the ones that are hearing, without, pull them together and say, so let's talk about what our classrooms are like and what they need to be. And so what do we need faculty to be able to do, and get them to talk about competencies. And so, and again, in part 2, we'll do a little bit more of that. I'm brainstorming, grain of salt, please, or grace. The capacity to create an inclusive classroom where all students across all identities feel they belong, they feel the learning environment is conducive to their learning, and that any and all microaggressions are interrupted so that it doesn't interrupt our learning, the learning of the students. We want faculty that can infuse in their curriculum multiple sources so that we're no longer only having white, heterosexual, able-bodied, Christian, cisgender men who are the sources of learning, but that students across all identities see themselves as well as see multiple identities in the learning, so that people are getting more ready for the world that they need to be leaders in. And faculty are able to work effectively with other faculty, to be innovative, to work on increasingly diverse teams, to partner across differences so we can create innovative programs, courses for students. So there is research that says that. You might want to look at Doctors Sean Harper, Sylvia Hurtado. I could keep going. So all the folks that wrote those books, especially recently, the Student Services Professional Handbook, folks that have been writing about inclusive organizations in student affairs, you might want to go outside of this and find faculty that are writing about it. There are a lot. AAC&U, American Association of Colleges and Universities, for decades at least, have had lots of folks. Damon Williams is probably the most renowned. He's got a couple books around creating inclusive organizations for senior diversity leaders as well as strategic leaders. AAC&U has lots of research and academic faculty type people that do that work. Dr. Sean Harper's center out of USC, who was at Penn, is now at USC. Not only the research, but they're working with top leaders and faculty leaders, academic leaders. So get the research. Might help faculty, but faculty are going to be resistant. There's just so many privileged identities generally there. And so go to the academic leaders and see if they can influence. And to be honest, you can change policies with HR and faculty leaders. And I don't care if faculty like it or not. And I'm talking about the very resistant ones. They're also probably having toxic environments in the classrooms and advising. And so how do you begin to look at holding people accountable for their behavior? So reasonable, resistant, yes. But I'm thinking about some faculty that I know that when I heard stories about what they do, they should have been fired a long time ago. So go into your performance management for faculty whose behaviors are so outside the norm. If they're just saying, you know what, that's all soft, and don't you love the gendered way we talk about this? It's just frivolous. Then you say, we're trying to attract and retain students to stay successful here. And so you come at it from a financial reason, you come at it from a recruitment. Quick one on this. Ask your academic leaders how much it costs to hire every faculty member. And then ask for retention numbers, disaggregated by race, gender, first gen, sexuality, disability, any demographics you can get. And notice who stays and who you leave. Your numbers may consistently look like we have 15, 20% people of color as faculty, but you look at the revolving door and then say, how many tens of thousands of dollars did we invest in hiring, much less mentoring, and all that wisdom we lost, and then it hurt our reputation. So I'll stop there. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more. And I know we have about a dozen questions we're not answering today, but again, Kathy will be addressing those next week on the 19th, and all that webinar information for the Q&A will be coming to you via email, plus it is on the thank you page if you registered for today's event. All right, so last question, and I think this is a good one. Are there pitfalls, fatal pitfalls that we should avoid?
How long do you have? I'll make sure I cover this as we keep going. The biggest pitfall I fell into was just wanting to create change now, and I would just go with the people that were ready. And as I mentioned earlier, I did this internal organization as well as a consultant many times to not get the leaders on board. And so it's a much slower process, and you invest the time up front, and then you're able to move more quickly as you get farther along. And you have the relationships and the competencies to deal with resistance as well as the difficult conversations that are coming up. And so really investing in leadership retreats, leadership development. I generally don't come into an organization unless I talk to the top leader and believe in my soul that they are committed to long-term culture change. Whereas, 10 years ago, I would take most whatever job people like, ooh, okay, that sounds like fun. Let's do it. Today at 61, I'm like, I only want to use my life force for people that I really want to create change. So I think that's a huge pitfall, being excited and or just so full of the pain of what's going on, and you move too quickly. And you're leaving so many people behind, especially those with the purse strings as well as a lot of power. Only focusing on people in their marginalized identities. So most everyone in an organization has some marginalized identity. And if you only focus on marginalized identity, that's only part of the dynamic. I think at the same time, you need to be engaging and developing competence for folks to recognize their privilege and to be able to see their responsibility to be panning the environment, noticing what's going on, interrupting microaggression, changing policies, and using their privilege to get more people involved in this work and holding people accountable. Folks in marginalized are we in our privileged identities do the similar work that takes the burden off, the emotional tax, the physical tax on folks that we've just said, oh, it's your job because you are. So that's a huge trap. Folks are exhausted. And so if we try to do this kind of organizational change without a systemic plan of having everyone privileged and marginalized accountable to moving forward, people are going to burn out quickly and literally leave your organization. And then you're just going to keep spinning in the same place. Those are the two that come to mind. The third one is the people that are leading the change deserve support. And whether you have them meeting every 2 or 3 weeks, you have them with coaches, you have them doing their own professional development, this work is significantly challenging, complex, very strategic, and very fluid and always changing. And so having the people talking among themselves as well as getting ideas from each other and other folk and sustaining their energy and momentum and their development, critical. And they may be there for a year or two and then leave because someone's like, ooh, we want you as our senior diversity officer. So developing the next generations, it's got to all be happening at once. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's possible. It can happen. It has been happening. But having this long-term vision that we're developing 2 and 3 generations of change agents and leaders while we have, so that was maybe 2 pitfalls in one. Thank you all for coming. I am just delighted. We had several hundred people on, and I know this will be watched by others that couldn't attend. Feel free to share it with anyone you want, and I look forward to seeing you on future webinars and future virtual institutes. All the best to you.